Yup. As you know, if you watched Wednesday's video, there's been a death in the family, which is limiting my time on video production this week and probably next week. Which means I've had to sort of mix the content up a little bit and find alternative subjects so that I can, talk over B-roll that I've saved from years before. Actually, this particular piece of footage has never been shown before. I never used it. In fact, if I'm completely honest, I don't remember ever filming it. So, anyway, at the moment, as motorcyclists and motorists, we're looking at a pretty bleak future. The world seems to have gone climate crisis mad, and everyone's answer to this is net zero. A perverse strategy, which, if the experts and scientists are to be believed, will make little to zero difference to the perceived problem. And also, net zero, of course, is touted to be unworkable. We cannot reach net zero. It's impossible, so it's a futile exercise, which will push up the cost of energy. Oh, hang on, that's already happened. Push people into poverty. Oh, that's already happening as well. Destroy economies. Now, yeah, that's already happened, but we can blame some of that on the pandemic. Now, this policy is just going to get worse, and it's going to make life harder and harder for everyone. Your children and your grandchildren are going to grow up in an environment similar to that of an open prison. It's becoming so extreme that now the European Union have mandated that it's permissible to put insects in your food, to achieve net zero. And I have yet to confirm the validity of this. I need to fact check it, and I haven't had time yet. But also, there are draft plans within the EU to condemn homes which don't meet the current energy usage criteria. So they will be able to forcibly evict you from your own home and prevent you from living in it until it's brought up to specification, or a property developer buys it from you for a fraction of its real value, brings it up to spec and rents it back to you, or knocks it down, builds a new residence and then rents that back to you. As I say, don't take that as gospel, because I haven't been able to fact check it yet, but I wouldn't be surprised. And it brings a whole new realisation to the term "you will own nothing and be happy." Now, let's try to put a positive slant on this presumed climate crisis. Is there something that could help to save the planet without destroying humanity in the process? Now, this is intended to be a positive, tongue-in-cheek video, or is it? At any rate, it's not intended to be, the gold standard of proposals. And in the comments section, I would welcome anyone's sort of ideas on how it could be improved, because I think there is some relevancy to this subject, but it's just been ignored for so long. I was trying to get my teeth into government statistics for how many motorcycles are registered for use on the UK roads at the moment. Not an easy task, because every government website that you look at gives you a completely different value. For instance, DVLA tells us that there are approximately 1.2 million motorcycles currently registered for use on UK roads, which equates roughly to about 3% of the motor vehicles on the road being motorcycles, or at least between 3 and 4%. Yet if you look at the accident statistics, the government says that 1% of the traffic on roads is motorcycles, but they account for 20% of deaths on the road. And I can't help thinking that the government has skewed the figures there slightly just to make motorcycles look even more dangerous than they really are. But we're used to that, aren't we? And there lies the problem. You see, if you look at other countries around the world, especially countries that have no intention whatsoever of following net zero, motorcycles, occupy a much larger percentage of the motor vehicles on the road. They're accepted as being cheap, economical, convenient forms of transport. But here in the UK, since the 1960s, motorcycles have been villainised, initially by the media, by the press, and ever since continually persecuted by our governments, our successive governments, as a dangerous, villainous, antisocial mode of transport. In fact, the sale of motorcycles of 125cc capacity or smaller are going to be the first to be banned in 2030. These are arguably the least polluting form of motor transport. It uses far less resources to build them. They consume less fuel. Now, I know the government doesn't like to discuss this, but the carbon footprint at manufacture is going to be tiny compared to that of an EV, which I think at the last disclosure that I read was about 60 to 70% higher than that of a normal ICE car. And you don't have to destroy the environment by digging up nickel and lithium. So by the time a small motorcycle rolls off the showroom floor, it's already far more environmentally friendly than an electric car. In fact, I'm going to hazard a guess and stick my neck out and say that an electric car would probably have to cover about 200,000 miles before it truly became environmentally as friendly as a motorcycle. But yeah, we know that the batteries aren't going to last that long, so it's never going to happen. Now, of course, it goes without saying that a motorcycle isn't everyone's cup of tea. For a start, they're not brilliant in the winter. Now, they're not actually as bad as you think they are. If you have the right sort of clothing, you can ride through a good proportion of winter without having to worry about snow and ice. But you would need some incentives to persuade people that it might be a good idea to leave the car in a drive and take a motorcycle to work. And I'll get onto that in due course. Now, the big problem with most motorcycles on the road is that they've been built by manufacturers to appeal to your average rider who wants big, fast and powerful. So a lot of these bikes on the road and a lot of the bikes that have been sold are, I'm going to admit it, frivolous, pointless machines. They're far bigger than they need to be, they're far faster than they need to be, they use more fuel than they need to, so understandably, despite all the emissions regs, they still have a higher CO2 output than, a sensible motorcycle. So a government would need to do something to incentivise manufacturers to build more sensible machines for the mass market. Or even, dare I say, and you're not going to like me for saying this, ban the sale of motorcycles over, let's say, 500cc's cubic capacity. Now, that might sound like an overreach, a draconian measure in order to save the planet, but, they're banning petrol engine and diesel engine cars, and me, even, someone who lives and breathes motorcycles, would consider that to be quite a realistic and acceptable compromise. Now, if I was president of the world, I would take this a step further. I would consult with, motor engineers and scientists, and we would come up with a specification that all new motorcycles have to be built to. And we would introduce a standard. All these bikes would have to achieve a minimum MPG figure by law. Now, if they had to limit the top end speed, so be it. I don't have a problem with that, as long as they're capable of moving with the normal flow of traffic on all roads. But let's say the starting point should be a minimum MPG figure of 100 miles to the gallon, irrespective of how the bike is ridden. All motorcycles must be capable of taking a pillion, and the manufacturer must make available luggage options for every model that they sell. Sensible luggage options that would allow you to take whatever gear you needed to get you to work and back, that would allow you to use that motorcycle to do, let's say, 4 days shopping for an average family, and they must have a tank range of at least 200 miles. Now, obviously, these motorcycles must adhere to the latest, most stringent emissions regulations. And I would even go so far as to say this could be a stepping stone situation where, these parameters can be tightened up over the years, offering manufacturers the opportunity to make these vehicles cleaner and to make them use even less fuel. Because the less fuel you use, the less environmental damage you're causing. Now, that's the manufacturers sort of taken care of, but now you've got to persuade the public to take motorcycles on to, get to work at least. I mean, I live on a main road, a busy road, and in rush hour, I look out of the window, I don't know how many cars pass my house, bearing in mind that there is also a bypass around my town, but there are a lot of cars at rush hour, and just about every single car has just one single occupant, the driver, driving everything from your average mid-sized family car to your big SUVs and pickups. It's unnecessary. I've always maintained that we should move away from that kind of usage. So you need to tempt as many people away from that behaviour as you possibly can. Not force them, tempt them. Now, for a start, if you can get them to switch over to one of these small motorcycles, you're going to virtually half, or probably more than half, their weekly fuel bill getting to and from work. So that helps, but it's not really enough. The next thing that we could do is road tax. I found the current road tax for a 500cc machine to be quite ridiculous, really, when you consider it puts far less wear and tear on the road than even a small car, and it causes far less pollution. I mean, there are some 1100cc motorcars on the road now that are zero road tax status. The owners don't pay anything to tax that vehicle, to keep it on the road. Yet those vehicles are more polluting than many small modern motorcycles. I don't think that we should get rid of road tax for motorcycles because at the end of the day, our tax system in this country requires that revenue to keep things moving, but it should at least be halved. And the zero road tax car status should be removed. They should pay a road tax. That will do two things. One, it will keep the money rolling into the governmental coffers. It would make the prospects of switching over to a motorcycle cost-wise more attractive. I mean, at that stage, you've got cheaper road tax for motorcycles, which I think is commensurate with their size and the wear and tear that they, subject the roads to. And you've got far better fuel economy. But I would take it even further than that. First of all, driver licensing. At the moment, it's incredibly difficult and incredibly expensive to get through the various tutorials and tests required to legally ride a motorcycle on the roads of Britain. It's a ridiculous situation, a product of the nanny state, really. It's unnecessary and it shouldn't continue. My proposition would be that anybody that has a full motorcar licence, manual motorcar licence, would automatically be entitled to ride a motorcycle, providing they have undergone and passed a rudimentary test designed to transition their driving skills from that of a car to a motorcycle safely. And that would be a government test system offered at a reasonable cost. The current driving test system for motorcycles is unworkable. It's a huge barrier against, the take-up of riding motorcycles, even small ones. And that would remove that barrier. Now, the other thing is the cost of the motorcycle. The vast majority of people that we want to take motorcycles on are car drivers. Now, we don't want to take their cars away from them because they are necessary for some journeys. What we want them to do is to adopt a motorcycle and use that motorcycle where it's appropriate, most of the time. Now, my proposal would be to adopt a government loan scheme for the purchase of these machines. That kind of scheme is not unusual. I mean, they have scrappage schemes for people to get rid of older polluted vehicles and moving to something that's more compliant. And of course we have the government cycle to work scheme. Now, I don't know what the current purchase prices are of cycles. They can be quite expensive. I know when I last looked at it about 13 years ago, the limit was £1,000. It's probably nearer £2,000 now. So if the government set a limit of £5,000, that would encourage motorcycle manufacturers to build bikes that would fit in within that scheme, because obviously they want as many sales as they can. This would represent the easiest way for people to buy a motorcycle, so it's a no-brainer. They would build bikes down to a price so that they're fitted within the remit of that scheme. And the idea is that the government would lay the money out for you, and then they would recoup the payments over a specified time, either interest-free or at a very low interest rate to be taken directly from your wages at your place of work. It would have to be tailored so as not to put too much financial pressure on the employee, to make it easily affordable. Obviously there would have to be some safeguards in place. The scheme would be transferable to another employer. It would probably have to be attached to your taxation and national insurance system, just to safeguard against bad debts if someone packs the job in or moves away. It would need to put something in place, not quite sure what yet, but it would need to be there. That would be a problem for my cabinet to sort out. So this would give us a situation where manufacturers were building small, economical motorcycles that are economical, low pollution, low cost, easily obtainable, that even non-motorcyclists would find attractive. Now, on top of that, I would mandate that employers and local councils provide sufficient free parking for these motorcycles, and they would be exempt from ULEZ and congestion charge zones, which I think would go a long way to making these more attractive as a method of transport. Now, even if just a third of the current car drivers that, use cars to get to work and do their sort of daily running around took up this scheme, what would the benefits be to the environment? Now, I wouldn't know how to go about getting definitive figures, but I reckon you could easily use a motorcycle 200 days of the year. Probably more, but I'm just making generous allowances there for adverse weather. Well, for a start, it would substantially reduce fuel usage and pressure on resources. And by that I mean environmental resources. As a government, you could mandate that these motorcycles should be built from a high percentage of recycled materials. Not difficult to do with a motorcycle, very difficult to achieve with an electric vehicle. And that could potentially lower their carbon footprint even further. You're using a lot less fuel on a motorcycle than you would in a car. So if you're using less fuel, you're creating less pollution, which means there is the potential there for substantially reducing urban pollution and CO2 emissions, whilst at the same time keeping your workers and your economy moving. But I believe the benefits go even further than that. The footprint of a motorcycle is much smaller than the footprint of even a small family car, at least a third. Let's keep your cycle lanes, but open them all up to motorcyclists. Now, I don't know whether it's the same in every city, but where I live in Hull, if you're riding a motorcycle, you are permitted to use most of the bus and cycle lanes on the road. And as it stands, on any given day when I've been into Hull, those lanes are empty, they're desolate, which means you can safely pass the mile queues of stationary traffic on a motorcycle and get to your destination much quicker again saving even more fuel and creating even less pollution. So a high take-up on these sort of motorcycles would reduce congestion, it would reduce environmental pollution even further because there would be less congestion. And I would wager that even your most die-hard motorcar driver, whilst sitting during the summer months in endless queues of traffic, watching motorcycles scoot by on the way home or on the way to work, is going to consider whether he or she should get a motorcycle too. Now, okay, there probably are a lot of bugs to work out in the scheme that I have in my head. I'm not denying that. Like I said at the beginning, if you have any suggestions that would make it better or more workable, let me know. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that a change in government attitude could make at least the UK a much more pleasant place to commute in. I mean, we've got the Welsh and the Scottish government, and I think the Department for Transport for England has hinted at it as well, that they want to cut vehicle miles or kilometres by 20%. I think a scheme like this has the potential to achieve that without having to impose any draconian measures on where people can go and how fast they're allowed to travel. A decent take-up of motorcycles is going to remove a lot of volume from the roads. It would automatically make things easier for car drivers as well. It would alleviate congestion and get traffic moving faster. What I'm saying is, it wouldn't just be good for those that took up motorcycling, it would also be good for the car driver because there'd be less cars on the road. The problem is, of course, it does require a change in government attitude. Either way, I think an idea like this is a good starting point. There certainly should be a conversation around it. So, let me know what you think to these proposals. How do you think you might be able to improve that? Let me know in the comments section below. Motorcycles have contributed such a lot to transport and society over the years. I still think they've got a lot more to give. Right, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. I really do appreciate it. I'd also appreciate it if you would leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're not already a subscriber, and when you do subscribe, hit the notification bell. Then go into your settings on your YouTube account and ensure that your notifications are enabled. That way you'll be informed whenever I upload nonsense like this. I will of course be back next week, so until then, if you're riding, please ride safely, and I'll see you soon.